Great pleasure to be talking in JNU, which I have, not attended, but almost did long years ago. And thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this session on a book, as everybody, Poonam has said, and well, Akshay can't say it for his own book, is a really stunning work of biography. I think there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, as somebody that's been a book critic for the last 15 years or so, that I haven't read something to rival this book in terms of the exhaustiveness of the research. And obviously, I will give full credit to Akshay, but one must also give credit to Agye, who is not related to Akshay, but seems to have the same archival sensibility. And as you read the book, when I read the book, I felt a little like this person has kept every single piece of paper, not just things that he's written that he takes seriously, but that he takes everything that he writes seriously, every letter, every chit, every sort of note. And I think that has helped create this really thoroughly documented account of somebody that, as people before me have said, is complicated. He isn't an easy figure. Rather than sort of say many things, let me try to just go. 1 second. Yes, I am going to go to maybe. So I thought I would sort of address two of the aspects and not sort of think chronologically, but think thematically. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, or maybe we can say it's actually one thing. So Agye's politics, yeah. Agye's politics, and I say with the caveat that I have read very little of Agye's work in the original, very little, and mostly I think I have read poetry. And I like his poems when he is not being very, very abstruse in his language, which he often is. But that is also part of his politics. So let me start by saying, I think, and Poonam has gestured to, and Akshay, sorry, this is really become bad now, I'm calling you again, this is terrible. Okay, both of them have talked about the actual biographical facts of, where he went and what he did. And I think what I might try and use that to talk about is to say, he's always been accused of inconsistency. And I think, obviously, to some extent, that's true. But I think maybe I'm a little more forgiving as a reader. And I think, he was a young man and a writer. And what I see when I read Akshay's biography of this man is a man hungry for experience. Perhaps even more so than most people are when they are young. And willing to go out there and try something out. Willing to sort of show up at the Ramo Congress session and say, I'm going to volunteer, sign up, start doing this work, then get disillusioned, then say, okay, I'm going to go for the left, I'm going to join the HSRA, usme bhi immediately bomb maker, sign. It's like he hurdles from thing to thing, and yet he does so, I think, with the full immersion. I admire that. And then he moves away from that, and then the moment when he joins the army, yes, it seems perplexing, especially for a writer. And yet I think maybe he's just thinking, okay, I'll try out this. I see it personally. I don't see it as a political decision. Perhaps that is ridiculous for me to think that. But I still think of him as a young man, a kind of trying out a different way of being almost. The idea of travel, the idea of being posted in different parts of the country, these are the things that seem to emerge in his letters from his army years. Very little of the ideological position that he is forced to take, I think, when people attack him. That doesn't seem to me, and I'm of course using only Akshay's representation or the many letters that he cites, but I get the sense that it's more a personal decision. The other kind of politics, though, is and the other thing, of course, as a writer, he is consistently critiqued by what is in his era largely a progressive Hindi writing world, and he never he refuses to be bound by what he thinks of as left ideology. So I think that in many ways he is not surprising to me because always he is reacting to what is around him. and saying, I want to be this. And so I think the individualism is actually at the core of his decisions. Sometimes it might be reactive in a way that's not very thought through. But I think he's actually, as he gets older, he seems to me to become very clear in an idea of whether we think about his ideas about tradition and modernity, whether we think of his ideas about the collective and the individual, or we think about his ideas on language, internationalism, cosmopolitanism, and moving in the direction of something which is very, can be accused of being nativist because he is both very international and yet wants to return to Hindi. He is very bilingual. He is very much somebody that can speak and write in English. He, in fact, wants to be known in the West, wants his work to be translated. But he's very keen on guarding Hindi writing and saying that if you're just an English writer, then you're not able or should not be allowed to represent India, right? So there's a very it's both cohesive and self-serving, you could say. But I think it's also true, the sense of the individual and his desire to be at all times only judged as one human being making a certain kind of decision. He does have a relationship to the state. He has a wife for many years who is actually part of the state. And yet he returns a lot of awards. He writes and speaks often on how literature should not be evaluated by state functionaries. He's constantly fighting for the independence of state-funded bodies. And when he works with the Congress for Cultural Freedom as well, I think there is a sense of, there is a sense of individual freedom within that. There isn't an ideological move towards, it's again something that works to make his connections with the West happen. And so, I think of it as, perhaps I'm just being cynical. I judge him as somebody that wants to make those connections happen for himself, really. One other thing about the politics that I would bring in, I don't know if I'm doing badly for time, but maybe. Okay, so the politics of gender in Agay's life really comes across in the book, and it's something that maybe I'll just give you a portrait of it because it may be something that tempts you to go into the 500 pages. It's engaging. So on the one hand, he seems very much this figure that has charm, and that he's the kind of figure that Upendranath Aksh, another Hindi writer of the time, in a story that Akshay relates. Akshay tells many stories. So the one thing I can say about this book is that Akshay is a historian, but he is a journalist first. So he really seems to have this great love of the anecdote, and these anecdotes are backed up by the archive, and so it's a perfect mix of both. So this story, Kaushalya, the wife of Upendranath Ashk, says that, why are you so irritated? She tells her husband, why are you so irritated with Agay? He's such a cultured, charming man. And Ashk, who thinks of himself, I think, is also very cultured and charming, sort of retorts to his wife, Agay's manners are not only liked by you, but wives of others also. Go ask wives of A and N, and everybody, all wives like Agay. So there's this, and there's women of many different persuasions, backgrounds, ages. Everyone seems to be charmed by Agay, to the point where there are motherly relationships with this Mrs. Lata Shilata Das, who's the wife of a doctor whose house he lives in Shillong. He manages to persuade the entire family to move to Allahabad when he is setting up a journal. When you think about it, it's quite remarkable. I mean, it's crazy. But that relationship remains all his life. There's that kind of. There is also then the fiery, passionate, rather unpinnable figure of Kripa Sen, who is one of, I think, this book's discoveries. I had never any idea that a Kripa Sen existed. I don't think anyone in the Hindi literary world did either. And Nadi Ke Tweet apparently is based a great deal on that romance. And she's, again, a remarkable figure because obviously you have to give him some credit for wanting, striving to find an equal in his relationships. And yet, I feel like, so he says at some point, in theory at least, he's very clear-eyed, right? There's a quote which is quite lovely where he says, the fact that Indian society, he talks about the fact that Indian society advises men like him to get married. Again, like he's just a young man who's had this kind of aborted marriage. And he says the Indian wife is a proud, non-salaried maid servant, competent in many things. I am not in favor of this solution, both as a principle and for personal reasons. So he says this, and one applauds him for it. In a letter in 1945, he says this. But then his marriages, I feel like, whether with Kapila Vatsyayan or later, I mean, the women get younger and younger. Kapila Vatsyayan is, what did you say, 18 years? 18 years his junior, and after that, Ila Dalmia is 33 years his junior. And these are relationships in which I have no objection to actually having a partner who's much younger than you, but these are women that surrendered a lot of their intellectual space and their equality that they had to running house for him. Right? So, in some ways, and yet this person is, is constantly being applauded. The bar is low, right? The bar remains low perhaps, but at that time the bar was very low. So everyone's constantly on about how he's a cook and a tailor and a carpenter and a gardener, but I'm not sure he's actually running these houses or these complicated lives that involve traveling and taking care of houses, and all of this is the wife. Okay, I think maybe this is where I should stop, because this is two kinds of the politics of the domestic space and the politics of his relationship with society and the state, I think, are both places where the contradictory self really emerges. And maybe the last one is language, which I think I gestured to, but I will leave it at that, and maybe we can talk about it more. Thank you.